around the world.
Across the Western Hemisphere, a new world order is arising. But unlike the post-World War globalist agenda that the world has been suffering under since the mid-20th century, this is a new agenda. It is organic, nationalist, and populist in nature. This movement is driven by the people of their respective nations against global elites and the slaves of the status quo who have betrayed their own people for too long. First, we had Brexit. That shocked the world. No one believed Brexit was going to be successful, but it was the spark of a global populist nationalist movement. And right on the heels of that, the election of Donald Trump in 2016. It sent shockwaves everywhere. For Americans, Donald Trump was the embodiment of the anti-establishment, anti-globalist sentiment, a living indictment of the ruling class and a repudiation of the status quo. But for the international community, the election of Trump was this terrifying fluke that pierced the veil of a seemingly untouchable cabal of power that has ruled unchallenged since the Cold War. For some, an inspiration, a tangible victory that signaled a new consensus, an indication that the globalist facade was starting to crack. Over the past 7 years, we've seen victories by populist figures across Europe and the Americas, and so far, they only seem to be picking up steam and growing in number. Even in the face of concentrated, powerful, entrenched opposition, we see these populist movements succeeding. But because they are organic, they are not identical. The qualms expressed by various groups of people in different countries around the world do differ from nation to nation. But one thing is clear, people have had enough of politicians, bureaucrats, and globalists who have forsaken their own people and the interests of their constituencies. In 2019, Brazil elected President Javier Bolsonaro in a sweeping popular revolution. Brazilians were tired of endemic political corruption, mass violence, and poor economic outcomes. Bolsonaro delivered for Brazil, but in doing so, he ticked off everyone in the entrenched corrupt power structures. They owned the courts and the urban federal districts, and ultimately, Bolsonaro lost a narrow but deeply concerning and possibly corrupt election, maybe one of the most concerning in modern history. Since then, he's faced persecution, and for the people in Brazil, life hasn't gotten better. Corruption and crime have returned, but something tells me it's not over yet. Popular movements are not so easily defeated. The fire that has been lit continues to burn in South America, and it has ignited an explosion of victories in El Salvador and Argentina. President Nayib Bukele was elected in a landslide in El Salvador, and following through on his campaign promises, he has really done a lot to endeavor on reversing that nation's decline. El Salvador was a poor, corrupt, and frankly, extremely violent nation, a failed state ruled by MS-13 more than the government itself. Drug cartels were the law and order in El Salvador. It's one of the reasons why people were leaving there in droves. Now, the gangsters are getting thrown in prison, and Bukele has opened his country up to foreign investment and economic prosperity. He has shown the world that decline is a choice, and the only reason crime is allowed to persist is because weak leaders refuse to do what is necessary. He's put the interests of law-abiding citizens first and seen to it that they are not forced to live in anarcho-tyranny. Now, why does that matter to us? Well, our theory of the case, right, as populist nationalists, is that if America is the best version of herself, then we don't have to buy into all this globalist nonsense because we can, through inspiration, get other nations to be the best versions of themselves. And then rather than all of us surrendering our autonomy and our self-determination to some globalist entity, whatever it is, we have the opportunity to have strong nations, strong borders, strong laws, safer streets, safer people, and then you don't get these mass migrations. What the narcos and cartels want, they want the diminution of borders. They want the erosion of the nation state because that's what creates the most permissible environment for their malign activity. Now, on the back of these victories, Argentina too has entered the fold. Once considered the Paris of the West, Buenos Aires and the rest of Argentina has really suffered from hyperinflation. It's the socialist economic policies that have brought it to bear. You've seen bureaucratic bloat, and those things have turned Argentina into a husk of its former self. Crime and third world migration have spurred other populist movements as well. Socialism, high taxes, out of control government spending, and the redistribution of wealth eventually takes its toll on a populace and always leads to the very corruption that then in turn spurs the productive, positive economic nationalism that can allow people to live better lives. When wages are stagnant and buying power is declining by the week, you can bet that a regime's days are numbered. And, in Argentina, they were. Javier Milei, an economic, I would say, eccentric individual, was elected president of Argentina in a convincing victory this past month. He was elected after a campaign of promises to absolutely rip out the bureaucracy and replace it with nothing. He called collectivists shit leftists and leftards and promised not to give them an inch. Argentina is set for one hell of a ride, and I'm bullish on their prospects for the future. But it's not just here on our side of the Atlantic Ocean. Europe also is gaining ground. In Italy, we saw various populist factions take control of the parliament. From Salvini to Meloni, Italians have enjoyed a string of victories spurred by opposition to mass migration from African and Middle Eastern countries. Migrants are committing violent crimes at a rate not seen outside the third world. Italians are starting to notice and vote accordingly. And I can't even believe we've reached this point, but like the chief globalist advocate in all of Europe is even having to concede to the power of our movement and the strength of our argument. Emmanuel Macron and France, even they are taking tougher stances on migration and immigration as the situation becomes more dire for the French, for the people in their country. Now, larger victories in Sweden and the Netherlands have occurred recently as well, proving that there's something really possible here to build on. Europeans do not want this mass migration. We also saw Wilders' party in the Netherlands. They swept the parliamentary elections, and they're poised to elect him as prime minister. He's been ahead of his time and has taken a lot of heat from the media for his stance on Islam. These Western countries enjoyed low crime and high trust until they surrendered to the globalist regimes and decided to flood their countries with foreigners. Now, Sweden and the Netherlands have these terrible endemics of rape and robbery and assaults committed by hordes of migrants brought from the most primitive areas of the world, thousands of miles away. For what reason? Nobody knows. There is not even a remotely coherent argument that this migration benefits the host nation. Presumably, this is occurring because the global left hates its own people and wishes their demise. No one voted for this. No one voted for their own replacement and displacement. Now, ignited by different flames, each of these cases is part of this greater general rejection of the powers that be. The global elites and the politicians that serve them, these powers have rejected what their people need and want, and they have ushered in an era of unprecedented decline, whether it's the demand for economic prosperity or the rejection of open borders or the demand for a return to law and order. People across the entire world are standing up for themselves and their nation and their people and their future. At times it feels overwhelming, like we're moving at a snail's pace. But in less than a decade's time, these victories have shown us that we are still in the fight. And you know what? There may be a better future for all of mankind as a result. Every year, we're gaining ground, and every year we're closer to building a new world order. Not a world order beholden to the nefarious and entrenched interests or antiquated and failed worldviews, but a world beholden to the will of the people within the nation states. A world full of nation states that are a lot stronger, where the nuclear family and faith and the rule of law and economic freedom, self-determination, cultural supremacy, and other foundations of civilization will be strengthened rather than undermined. Thanks so much for watching this video. Make sure you're subscribed to our channel with notifications turned on. You won't want to miss any of the breaking news.